The auctioneer called the lot a third time, and I was the only one left in the room. Not because the others had stepped out. They were all still there. 14 registered buyers from 7 species, standing along the back wall of docking bay 9 with their arms folded and their bidding paddles at their sides. They watched the auctioneer. They watched the ship. They did not raise their paddles. The ship in question sat on berths 4 through 7, which tells you how large it was. A Class 7 cosmic cruiser, registration scrubbed, point of origin listed as unknown, previous owner listed as dissolved entity. The hull was dark green and silver, which is not any species standard color scheme, which meant it had been repainted at least once. The running lights were on. Life support was active. That was the part nobody seemed to want to mention. I raised my paddle. The auctioneer, a tall, gray-skinned KLT male who had been doing this job for probably 40 years, looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. It was not surprise exactly. It was something closer to resignation. The bid stands at 900 standard units, he said. Going once. The buyer next to me, a bulky Vrinthian trader named Gore, who I had known for 6 years and bought hull, plating from on 3 separate occasions, turned his head and looked at me the way you look at someone who has just told you they plan to walk off a cliff. Going twice. Gore leaned toward me slightly and said, in a low voice, "Marcus." I did not look at him. "Sold," said the auctioneer, to the human representative. Lot registration transferred on payment of deposit. The room was very quiet. Not the quiet of a completed transaction, where people begin gathering their things and checking their next items. This was a different kind of quiet. This was the quiet of people watching something happen that they are glad is not happening to them. I walked to the registration desk and paid my deposit. 940 units total after fees. I had spent more than that on a set of copper-lined exhaust manifolds the previous spring. The clerk processed my paperwork without meeting my eyes. Gore caught up with me at the bay entrance. "Marcus," he said again. He had a habit of saying my name before anything important, as though checking that I was still the person he thought I was. "I got a good price," I said. "Nobody bid against you. That is what a good price looks like." Gore stopped walking. I stopped too, because he was blocking the door and he was significantly larger than me. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something I did not expect. "I have done business in this sector for 22 years, he said. "I know that ship. Not personally, but I know what it is." "We all do," he paused. "You do not?" "Then tell me." He shook his head. Not reluctant. Decided. "If I tell you, then I know something that connects me to it." "I do not want that connection." He stepped aside. "Be careful, Marcus, and do not open the cargo section until you have another human present." He walked away before I could ask him anything else. I stood in the entrance to Bay 9 and looked at my new ship. 940 units. The running lights blinked steadily in the recycled air of the station. I went and got my survey kit. A standard condition survey takes about 2 hours for a vessel this size. You start at the bow, work your way back through every accessible compartment, log everything you find, note anything that needs repair, and build your cost estimate for restoration or resale. I had done this maybe 300 times in my career. I knew the rhythm of it. The bow section was clean. Not dusty clean or neglected clean. Clean in the way that suggests someone went through with purpose, removing things they did not want found. The navigation console had been wiped. Not damaged, wiped. The logbooks were gone. The crew identity panels were blank. Someone had spent real time making this ship anonymous. The crew quarters were the same. 6 berths, all stripped to the metal. No personal items, no waste, no clothing, nothing. The galley had been emptied and scoured. The medical bay had been cleared of all supplies, which is unusual enough that I logged it twice and took extra photographs. I moved toward the rear section. The engine compartment was in good condition, which was the first genuinely surprising thing. Whatever else had happened to this ship, it had been maintained. The drives were not new, but they were calibrated and clean. Somebody had cared about keeping this vessel operational until very recently. I moved further back. The rear cargo section was separated from the rest of the ship by a pressure door. This is normal for Class 7 cruisers. You want to be able to seal off a large cargo hold from the main vessel in case of atmosphere breach or fire. The door was closed. This was also normal. What was not normal was the temperature reading on the panel beside it. The cargo section was running at standard life support temperature, not storage temperature, which is colder and optimized for goods. Life support temperature. I stood in front of that door for probably 2 minutes. Gore had said not to open it without another human present. I considered that. I considered the 14 buyers who had all refused to bid. I considered the auctioneer's expression. I considered the scrub registration and the wiped logs and the empty medical bay. Then I considered that whatever was on the other side of that door was running on life support, and I was the only person currently aboard this ship, and I had just become its legal owner. And if something on the other side of that door needed help, standing in the corridor thinking about it was not going to provide any. I put my hand on the release. I told myself it was probably just a pressure equalization system running automatically. I told myself life support in cargo sections is sometimes left at standard temperature by mistake. I told myself there were a lot of reasonable explanations for what I was seeing on that panel. I pressed the release, and the door opened inward. The air that came out was stale and warm and carried a smell I recognized from the 2 times in my career I had found vessels in genuine distress. It was the smell of too many living bodies in too small a space for too long. The cargo hold was large. Under normal circumstances, it would have held stacked containers, secured freight, whatever the ship was hired to move. It was not holding any of that. Along both walls, on the floor, in the corners, in every flat space that existed in that hold, there were people. Not cargo. People. 12 of them, from what I could count in the first few seconds, for different species, all of them looking at me with expressions that I would describe as the intersection of terror and a very fragile kind of hope. None of them said anything. I looked at them. They looked at me. And then, from somewhere in the back of the group, a voice said something in a language my translator did not catch, and a second voice answered in broken standard. It is a human. There was a pause. Humans are not part of this, said the second voice. It sounded like whoever was speaking was not sure whether that was good or bad. I set my survey kit down on the floor, sat down with my back against the doorframe, so I was lower than all of them and clearly not blocking the exit, and said, "My name is Marcus Hale. I just bought this ship. I'm going to need someone to explain to me what is going on, because I'm getting the impression I bought more than a ship." Nobody moved for a long moment. Then a thin, pale-scaled being near the left wall, not a species I recognized, with large amber eyes and 4-fingered hands, slowly raised one hand and said, in careful, accented standard, "We are what is going on." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Let's start there." The first thing I did was water. I had 2 large containers in my survey kit. I carry them because old ships sometimes have contaminated water lines, and you do not want to find that out by drinking from them. I set both containers in the middle of the floor and moved back to the doorframe. It took about 30 seconds before the nearest person, a young male of a species I eventually identified as Verati, crawled forward and took one of the containers. He drank, then passed it back without drinking more than a few mouthfuls. That kind of restrained sharing under extreme thirst told me something about how long they had been in here and what kind of people they were. While they passed the water around, I took stock. 12 individuals. For species, the pale-scale beings I could not identify numbered 3. There were 4 Verati, which are a bipedal species from the mid-systems with a trade reputation for being reliable and a political reputation for being independent. There were 3 beings with dense gray fur and very still, observant eyes, and 2 others who were clearly from different species from the rest, but were sitting close together the way people sit when they have decided that shared suffering makes them allies. Nobody appeared to be seriously injured, but several of them were moving carefully, which suggested bruised ribs or joint from the hard floor. The youngest-looking member of the group, the pale-scaled one who had spoken first, had a swollen hand that she was holding against her side. I said, "I have a medical kit on my tug. I can get it. You will come back," said the pale-scaled one. Her standard was better than I had initially thought. She had been choosing her words carefully, not struggling with them. "On this ship," I said. "There is nowhere else I need to be. I got the medical kit. I also got my second water container, an emergency ration pack, and the portable signal booster I use when I am working deep in a station where the comms cut out." When I came back, nobody had moved, but the atmosphere in the hold had shifted slightly. They were watching the door. They were watching me. I sat back down in the door frame and said, "I'm going to ask you some questions. You do not have to answer anything, but I think I need to understand what happened here before I can help. And I would like to help." The pale-scaled one looked at the others. There was a silent exchange that went around the group. Then she looked back at me and said, What do you know about the Vethra Combine? I knew the name. Anybody who worked salvage in this sector knew the name. The Vethra Combine was a trade consortium, one of the largest operating in the outer and mid sectors. They ran freight contracts, licensed shipping routes, and had enough political connections across three major governments that they existed in a space where rules applied differently to them than to everyone else. I know they are large, I said, and that they have friends. They have more than friends, she said. They have agreements with governments, with courts, with the people who decide which cases get investigated and which cases get closed. She paused. She was choosing her words very carefully now, not from language difficulty, but from the habit of someone who has learned that saying too much in the wrong place has consequences. 4 months ago, she said, I was working as a document processor for a trade registry on the Bellin station. It is not an important job. Nobody notices a document processor. She paused again. But a document processor sees a great many documents. I waited. I saw a contract, she said, a standard freight agreement, except that the cargo category was listed in a code I did not recognize. I looked it up. The code is used by the Vethra Combine for what they call held assets, which is a term they use internally for she stopped. For people, I said. She looked at me. For people, she said, beings who had seen something or who the Combine wanted to remove from a situation without official record. They were not harmed directly. They were held, moved from ship to ship, kept in sections like this one until she paused again, and this time the pause had more weight to it, until the ships were no longer needed, and the ships were disposed of. Through auctions, I said. Through auctions, she said, with the life support systems still running, and no bids. The room was very quiet. This is the fourth ship I have been moved through, she said. I do not know how long I was on the others. The lights in the hold are always the same. There is no way to count days. I looked around the hold. 12 people, for species, all of them watching me with that same expression, terror and fragile hope, held very carefully like something that had been broken before and they were afraid of breaking again. The others at the auction today, I said. They knew. They always know, said one of the gray-furred beings from the back of the group. His voice was quiet and very flat. They know and they do not bid, because bidding means involvement, and involvement with the Combine means problems. I thought about Gore telling me to be careful. Gore, who had known me for 6 years and done business with me in good faith, and had watched me walk toward that ship with the expression of a man watching someone step into traffic. I thought about the auctioneer's face. I thought about 14 registered buyers standing along the wall with their paddles at their sides. I picked up my signal booster and turned it on. I said, my tug is docked at the outer ring. It has a full communications array and an encrypted channel to Earth's Salvage Licensing Authority, which is the body I report to as a licensed wreck broker. I looked at the pale-scaled one. I need you to tell me your name. She looked at me for a long moment. Nessa, she said. My name is Nessa. Nessa, I said. I'm going to make a call. I want you to be present when I make it. I want them to hear your voice, and I want you to hear mine, so you know exactly what I am saying about this situation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what makes you think your authority will do anything? We have been moved through 4 ships. The people who put us here have agreements with governments. They have agreements with their governments, I said. I'm going to call mine. I opened the channel. What happened next surprised even me, and I am not easily surprised. The Salvage Licensing Authority picked up in under a minute, which is normal. I gave my broker identification, my location, and the lot number of the vessel I had purchased. I stated that I had found living persons aboard in what appeared to be a condition of unlawful confinement, and that I believed the vessel had been used to transport held individuals by the Vethra Combine. There was a pause on the line. Then the operator said, please hold. I held. Nessa vachid me. The others watched me. The hold music lasted exactly 40 seconds. Then a different voice came on, older, official, with the careful diction of someone who has learned to speak in ways that are both clear and recorded. Mr. Hale, said the voice. This is Deputy Director Carol Warren, United Human Trade Commission, Outer Sectors Division. I'm going to need you to secure that vessel and not allow anyone to board or depart until our team arrives. Do you understand? Yes, I said. We are 8 hours out. Do not move the ship. Do not contact anyone else. Do not allow the station authority to take custody of any persons aboard. A pause. Are the individuals alive? Yes, I said. 12. For species. Another pause. Shorter this time, but heavier. Mr. Hale, said Deputy Director Warren, this is not the first ship we have tracked with this profile. It is the first one with survivors. Another pause. Stay where you are. We are coming. The line stayed open. I looked at Nessa. 8 hours, I said. She looked at the signal booster, then back at me. Something in her expression shifted. Not quite relief. She had been through too much for something as simple as relief, but something adjacent to it. Something that was perhaps the very first small step in the direction of believing that this time the ending might be different. 8 hours, she said. I reached into my kit and opened the emergency ration pack. Then we should eat something, I said, and you should tell me about the contract you saw. All of it. I'm going to need to remember every detail. Nessa looked at me for a moment longer. Then she reached out and took a ration bar, and she started talking. Carol Warren arrived in 7 hours and 52 minutes, which told me she had pushed her ship harder than standard transit speed, which told me more about the situation than anything she said in the first 10 minutes after boarding. She brought 4 people with her, 2 from the Trade Commission and 2 who carry themselves the way people carry themselves when their actual job does not appear on official paperwork. They were professional and quiet, and moved through the ship with the focused efficiency of people who had prepared for exactly this and had been waiting for exactly this for a longer time than they would prefer. They gave the 12 survivors medical attention first. Proper medical attention, with a field kit that made my emergency supplies look like a child's toy. They were gentle and thorough, and none of them showed any reaction to species difference, which I noticed because in my experience, that kind of easy professionalism around multiple species takes either years of training or a particular kind of person. Carol Warren was a compact woman in her 50s with gray at her temples and the kind of eyes that have looked at a great many difficult things without looking away. She sat across from me in the ship's empty galley with a recording device on the table between us and a cup of the emergency coffee I had brewed from my kit, which she drank without complaint even though it was not good coffee. Walk me through the auction, she said. I walked her through it. I told her about the 14 buyers who did not bid. I told her about Gore. I told her what he had said to me at the door. You know his full name and registration? She said. Yes. We will want that. I expected you would, I said. I gave her Gore's information. I felt something about doing it. Not quite guilt because Gore had not done anything illegal, as far as I knew. He had simply known and not acted. But then, so had 13 other buyers, and so had an auctioneer with 40 years of experience. Knowing and not acting is its own kind of thing. The Vethra combined, I said. Nessa told me about the contracts she saw. She has a strong memory. She worked in document processing. She gave me clause numbers, reference codes, dates. Carol Warren looked at me steadily. You recorded it. I record everything during a survey, I said. Professional habit. For the first time, something moved in her expression that might have been satisfaction. Mr. Hale, she said, your professional habits are about to become very important. She told me then what she could tell me, which was more than I expected. The Trade Commission had been tracking a pattern of vessels matching this profile for 11 years. 6 ships, all Class 6 or Class 7, all with scrub registrations, all found adrift or brought through auction, all empty or worse than empty. Each case had been reported, investigated, and closed with the help of the same consortium of legal firms whose client list, if you traced it carefully, pointed back to the Vethra Combine. How did they close the cases? I said. Jurisdiction disputes, mostly, said Carol. 3 of the ships were found in neutral space. 2 were found in sectors controlled by governments that had trade agreements with the Combine. 1 was found in Kelty territory, and the Kelty Authority determined they had no evidence of any wrongdoing. She paused. The Kelty Authority at the time was chaired by a minister who has since retired to a private estate on a Kelty moon. The estate was purchased 3 months before the case was closed. I sat with that for a moment. The governments involved, I said. The ones that had agreements with the Combine. 3, she said. The Vrint Cooperative Authority, Gore's home government, which is why he knew what the ship was and why he was not going to touch it. The Bellin Federation, which is where Nessa worked. And the Theric Assembly. 2 of the species in that hold are Bellin, I said, and 3 are Theric. Carol nodded slowly. Yes. I looked at the table for a moment. The people who put them on this ship, I said. Some of them were from the same governments as the people they were putting on it. That is correct. I had known that was true from the moment Nessa had started talking to me, but hearing it said plainly in a quiet galley with bad coffee and a recording device between us made it land differently. Nessa saw a document, I said. A contract. She told me about it in detail. She told me the code they use internally. Held assets. Carol Warren's expression did not change. We have heard that term before, she said. We have never had documentation. Nessa is a document processor, I said. She does not just remember what a document said. She remembers the layout, the header codes, the signatory fields, the reference numbers in the margins. I looked at Carol. She has a memory that would be extraordinary in any job. In document processing, it is remarkable. Carol looked at me for a long moment. You have been recording since you found them. Since I opened the hold door, I said. Survey habit. I document everything I find aboard a vessel before I disturb it. And you have not transmitted those recordings to anyone. I transmitted them to the commission when I made the initial call, I said. Everything was live from the moment I opened the channel. Your recording system would have captured it simultaneously with mine. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Hale, are you aware that you are currently the legal owner of the only intact crime scene we have ever had access to in 11 years of tracking this pattern? I had started to get that impression, I said. We're going to need you to leave the ship exactly as it is. We're going to need your full survey documentation. We're going to need your communication logs from the moment you purchased the vessel at auction. And we're going to need you to testify. Where? I said. The Galactic Commerce Tribunal, she said. It is the only body with jurisdiction broad enough to cover all three governments and the Combine itself. We have never had standing to bring a case there because we have never had surviving witnesses, documented evidence, and a clean chain of custody from discovery to preservation. She paused. We have all three now. I thought about the 14 buyers with their paddles at their sides. I thought about the auctioneer's expression. I thought about Gore's voice. Be careful, Marcus. When, I said, as soon as we can get it scheduled, said Carol. The Combine has friends in a lot of places. The longer we wait, the more opportunity those friends have to find procedural reasons to prevent the case from being heard. She paused. We are going to move fast. Humans tend to, I said. She almost smiled. Yes, she said. We do. I looked at the recording device on the table. Nessa and the others, I said. What happens to them? They come with us. They are witnesses, and they're also the people this was done to, and they will be treated as both. Carol's voice did not change in tone, but there was something underneath it that was not official. Something that was simply tired and angry and certain. They will be treated properly, Mr. Hale. I give my word on that. I nodded. One more question, I said. The government's involved. The Vrenth Authority, the Bellin Federation, the Theric Assembly. Are they going to try to block the tribunal hearing? Carol Warren picked up her coffee cup. They're going to try, she said. They're going to try very hard with very expensive lawyers and a great deal of procedural creativity, she drank. But the tribunal requires a 2/3 majority of member species observers to halt a hearing once it has been opened. And the Combine's influence, while extensive, does not extend to 2/3 of anyone. What does it extend to? About 1/3, she said, which means the other 2/3 get to watch. She set her cup down and picked up the recording device. And that, she said, is exactly the problem for them. The Galactic Commerce Tribunal had not convened an emergency session at the request of a non-member species in its entire recorded history. The clerk who processed our petition told us this as though it were relevant information. Carol Warren thanked her for sharing it and submitted the petition anyway. The session was scheduled for 12 days after I found the hold. The tribunal chamber was located on a shared station at the intersection of 4 major trade routes. A deliberate choice made centuries ago to ensure that no single species controlled the physical space where disputes were resolved. The chamber itself was large enough to hold delegations from 30 species simultaneously, with observation galleries above the main floor and a translation system that ran in real time across 47 languages. I had never been inside it before. I arrived with Carol and her team, with 3 human legal representatives who had not slept in 2 days and showed no signs of intending to, and with Nessa and 4 of the other survivors who had chosen to testify. The others were in secure accommodation, resting, some for the first time in months. The three governments and their legal teams were already present when we entered. I recognized the look of people who have spent a great deal of money on a problem and are about to spend a great deal more. They were arranged on the right side of the chamber in delegations of various sizes, with the Vethra Combine's representatives seated separately at a table near the center that had clearly been placed there by someone with good political instincts about visible neutrality. The Combine's chief legal representative was a tall, well-dressed individual of a species I did not know, with a calm face that had been calm for so long it had stopped being an expression and started being a feature. He looked at our delegation when we entered, then looked away without any particular reaction. The observer gallery was full. I had not expected that. The tribunal was opened by a neutral arbiter from a species called the Quellan, a people with a reputation for fairness that was old enough to be nearly legendary in galactic law. The arbiter was elderly and moved slowly and spoke with the kind of careful precision that comes not from caution, but from long habit of saying exactly what is meant and nothing else. She stated the purpose of the session, the nature of the petition, and the identity of the parties. Then she looked at the Combine's table and said, in measured standard, the respondent may raise procedural objections at this time. 3 objections were raised simultaneously. The first was that the tribunal lacked jurisdiction because the vessel in question had been registered in neutral space. Carol's legal team had a prepared response to this that referenced 4 separate tribunal precedents and took under 3 minutes to deliver. The second objection was that the human witness, meaning me, could not establish chain of custody because I was not a government official. The response to this cited my license status as a certified wreck broker under Galactic Commerce Code, the live transmission of my documentation to a registered government authority at the moment of discovery, and the fact that Galactic Commerce Code does not require government affiliation for a certified professional's evidence to be admissible. The third objection was more creative. It argued that the presence of the individuals in the hold could not be characterized as unlawful because the vessels in question were operating under freight agreements that defined the individuals as cargo under the Combine's internal classification system. I had been sitting quietly through the first 2 objections. When the third one was made, I heard Nessa, sitting 2 seats to my left, draw a very slow breath. Carol's legal representative stood and said, "The respondent's argument relies on the Combine's internal classification of held assets. We would like to request that the tribunal require the respondent to read aloud, in full, the section of galactic commerce law under which that classification was authorized." There was a brief pause at the Combine's table. The arbiter looked at the Combine's chief representative. "The request is within procedure," she said. "Please proceed." The chief representative read the clause. It was technical and dense, and it relied on an exception built into the Commerce Code in the section dealing with non-standard freight categories. When he finished reading, Carol's representative said, "We thank the respondent." Now we would ask the tribunal to note that the exception clause just read was authored and submitted for inclusion in the Commerce Code by the Vethra Combine's founding species 73 years ago, at a session of the tribunal in which no other species present was aware that the clause was being inserted specifically to allow this practice. The chamber went very quiet. The arbiter said, in her precise, unhurried voice, "The tribunal will note this." "We would further ask," said Carol's representative, "that the tribunal note the identity of the author of the clause, the date of its submission, and the fact that in 73 years it has never been used in any tribunal proceeding except as a defense in cases involving the Vethra Combine." The observer gallery had been quiet since the session began. It remained quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The Combine's chief representative said, "The clause was legally submitted and approved by the tribunal of its time. Its origins are not relevant to its current standing." Carol's representative looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "We are not disputing the clause's legal standing. We are simply providing the tribunal and its observers with complete context for the argument being made." She paused. "Context is always relevant." The arbiter called the first witness. "I testified for 2 hours. I described the auction in detail. I described the 14 buyers who did not bid. I described Gore. I read from my survey documentation, which had been submitted in full to the tribunal record. I described opening the hold door. When I described what I found inside, I kept my voice level and my language plain. I did not try to make it dramatic. What had happened in that hold did not need any help from me to be what it was. The Combine's legal team cross-examined me. They questioned my qualifications, my chain of custody, my decision not to contact station authorities immediately. I answered each question directly. I had done nothing outside proper procedure. I had transmitted my findings live to a registered authority. I had not disturbed the scene. I had not moved the ship. The Combine's team did not find anything useful in my answers because there was nothing useful to find. Then Nessa testified. She sat in the witness position with her swollen hand resting in her lap. It had been properly treated but was still healing, and she spoke clearly and without hesitation. She described the document. She gave the clause number, the header code, the reference numbers in the margins. She described the signatory fields and who had signed. She named 3 officers of the Vethra Combine whose signature she had seen, and she gave the dates. She described what had happened after she reported what she had seen to her station supervisor. She described being told she was mistaken. She described being told she had misread the codes. She described being taken from her quarters 2 nights later by individuals she did not recognize. She described 4 ships. She described the holds. She described the sounds of the life support cycling, which she had heard so many times in the dark that she could still hear it when she was trying to sleep. She described the smell when my hold door opened, and how she had thought, for a moment, that it was another transfer. And then she had seen what I was, and that she had not known whether to be relieved or more afraid. The chamber was completely silent. The Combine's legal team had the right to cross-examine. Their chief representative stood. He looked at Nessa for a moment. Then he asked his first question, which was about the specific formatting of the document she had described, presumably to establish that she might have misremembered a technical detail. Nessa recited the formatting from memory. Section headers, subheading structure, margin width, footer reference code. All of it. The representative asked a second question about the date. Nessa gave the date. Then she gave the dates of the 3 other documents she had processed that same day, their subject matter, and their reference numbers, to demonstrate that the document in question was not a memory she was reconstructing, but a specific file she had cataloged alongside 37 others in a single working session. The cross-examination ended after 4 questions. By the time the other witnesses had finished, 3 of the observer delegations in the gallery had sent formal notes to the arbiter requesting that their governments be recorded as non-party observers to any findings that resulted from the session. This is a procedural way of signaling that you want to be on the correct side of whatever happens next without having been part of what caused it to need to happen. The Vrinth Cooperative Authorities delegation, which had arrived with a confident legal team and a prepared strategy, had gone very quiet after Nessa's testimony. I could see them across the chamber floor. The lead delegate had stopped taking notes about an hour into Nessa's testimony and had not started again. I found out later that the Vrinth delegate had sent an encrypted communication to the Vrinth Authorities Senior Council during the lunch recess. I did not find out exactly what she said. But 2 days after the session, the Vrinth Authority formally withdrew its legal objection to the case and announced it was launching its own internal review of its trade agreements with the Combine. The Bellin Federation's delegate did not withdraw during the session, but their legal contributions to the Combine's defense became increasingly minimal as the day went on. By the final hour, they had stopped speaking entirely. The Theric Assembly's representative asked, during the afternoon session, to address the tribunal directly rather than through their legal team. The arbiter allowed it. The Theric representative stood and said that the Theric Assembly wished the tribunal to note that the individuals aboard the vessel had included Theric citizens, and that the Assembly considered this a matter requiring full cooperation with any findings. Carol, sitting beside me, wrote something on a small notepad and slid it toward me. It read, "That is the 3rd government. They just separated themselves from the Combine." I looked at the Combine's table. The chief representative was still calm. It had moved from being a feature back to being an expression. The expression was not easy to read, but it was no longer the expression of a man who expected to win. The session closed for deliberation. Carol and I sat in a side corridor while her legal team debriefed. She had another cup of coffee from a station vendor that was only slightly better than mine. "The 3 governments," I said. "They're going to escape most of the consequences, are they not?" Carol considered that for a moment. The Combine will not, she said. The Combine has no government protection left. The Combine will face full dissolution proceedings and financial liability across every jurisdiction where they operated. She paused. The governments are more complicated. What they did was within the framework of agreements that were technically legal. They participated in something that was made legal by a clause that should never have been in the code, but it was in the code. So they knew, I said. And because they helped write the rules, knowing was legal. The clause will be struck, Carol said. That is certain. And three governments are going to have a very long period of scrutiny ahead of them and internal hearings and public pressure from their own citizens who are currently finding out what their governments approved. She paused again, which is not the same as a conviction, but it is not nothing. I looked at my coffee. Gore, I said. Gore knew and did not report, Carol said. That is not a crime under current code. It may be reviewed as part of the broader proceeding, but she stopped. We cannot proceed against everyone who looked away. Marcus. There were a lot of them. I know, I said. We sat quietly for a while. The other ships, I said. The 6 that were found empty. The cases that were closed. Reopened, Carol said. All of them. We will be requesting assistance from multiple species forensic authorities. Human forensic teams are already preparing to coordinate, she paused. It will take time. The evidence is old, but the cases will not stay closed. I nodded. You should know, Carol said, that the deputy director level does not usually get on a ship and transit 8 hours at speed to a salvage bay in the outer sector. I had wondered about that, I said. We have been building toward this case for a long time, she said. We had the pattern. We had the profile. We had 11 years of circumstantial evidence that we could not use because we could not get anyone inside a proceeding withstanding. She looked at her coffee. And then a wreck broker from the outer sector bought a ship for 900 units because nobody else would. I said, I bought it because the price was good. I know, she said. That is the part the Combine did not account for. They did not account for someone who was not afraid of them because he had never heard of them. I thought about that. They assumed, I said slowly, that everyone at that auction knew what the ship was. And everyone who knew what it was afraid, Carol said. Yes, but I did not know, I said. No, she said. You just thought it was a good price. We both sat with that for a moment. The arbiter's findings were issued 4 days later. The Vethera Combine was found in violation of Galactic Commerce Code across 14 separate categories. Dissolution proceedings were ordered immediately. Full financial liability was assessed against the founding directors. The exception clause was struck from the code permanently. 3 open investigations were referred to cross-species forensic authorities. The other 3 followed within a week, as additional evidence from Nessa's testimony was cross-referenced with existing records. I received a formal commendation from the United Human Trade Commission, which Carol brought in person. It was framed. I put it in a drawer because I do not have anywhere to hang things in a tug. I also received a formal inquiry from Carol's office asking whether I intended to retain the vessel. I did. I spent the next 4 months refitting the cruiser. I kept the whole color, dark green and silver. It had grown on me. I replaced every system that had been stripped or wiped, starting with the navigation console and working back. I installed a proper communications array with military-grade encryption, a full medical bay stocked for multiple species, enough ration storage for 30 people and 6 weeks of transit, and a crew quarters configuration that could accommodate various physiologies in reasonable comfort. I replaced the scrub registration with a clean one and filed it under my name with the Galactic Salvage Authority. I named the ship the Open Door. It is not a subtle name. I was not going for subtle. 2 of the survivors asked to stay. Nessa was still giving testimony in various ongoing proceedings, moving between hearing chambers across 3 sectors, but she had long stretches between sessions where she needed somewhere to be. She came back to the ship one afternoon while I was still fitting the medical bay, sat on a crate near the cargo hold entrance, and watched me work for about an hour before she said anything. I keep thinking about the hold, she said. I did not look up from what I was doing. That is understandable. Not the way you might think, she said. I think about what it looked like from inside when the door opened. I think about what we were expecting, and then what we saw instead. I set down my tools and looked at her. A human with a survey kit, she said, sitting on the floor, so he was shorter than us, setting water in the middle of the room and moving away from it. That is basic practice, I said. You do not approach a distress group. You put resources in the middle and let them come to you when they are ready. Where did you learn that? My first supervisor, I said. She did marine recovery before she moved to space salvage. Found a lot of vessels in trouble. Said the worst thing you can do is walk toward frightened people. Nessa was quiet for a moment. She sounded like someone worth learning from. I said. I picked up my tools again. Are you asking if you can stay? I am sitting on a crate in your medical bay, she said. Yes. You have a translator implant, and you read codes faster than my scanner software, I said. And I do not have a co-pilot. I paused. But I should tell you what the work actually is before you decide. Tell me. I find ships that other people did not want to find. I go through them systematically and document what is inside. Sometimes it is salvage. Sometimes it is something else. I looked at her. The commission has asked me to take on a sector monitoring role. They are distributing a profile to every licensed broker in 6 sectors, vessels matching certain characteristics, certain histories, certain auction patterns. If I see a match, I investigate. Nessa looked at the hold entrance. Then she looked back at me. And if you find people, then we do what we did before, I said. Call Carol. Document everything. Wait. She was quiet for a long time. The other person you mentioned, she said. Who wanted to stay? Oren, I said. Gray fur. Very quiet. Navigational training. I know Oren, she said. We were on 2 of the same ships. She paused. He trusts me. That works, I said. Oren arrived the following week with a single bag and took one look at the navigation console and asked me 3 technical questions about its calibration that I could not answer, which settled the question of whether he was qualified. He was thorough and methodical and spoke very little, which suited the work. He had the habit, which I came to recognize over time, of checking the life support readings every hour. Not because anything was wrong, just checking. I understood why. Our first assignment under the commission monitoring role came through 6 weeks after the refit was complete. A report from a human trade monitor in the outer belt, a vessel matching the profile, logged as empty and sealed by a local station authority 3 weeks earlier. The station authority had filed it as abandoned property and were preparing to auction it. The profile match was clear enough that Carol's office flagged it before the auction listing even went public. We got there in 11 hours. I had pushed the drives harder than standard, not because I'd been told to, but because the math on what the profile meant had become personal enough that 11 hours felt like 11 hours too many. The vessel was smaller than mine, a Class 5, older design, paint worn to the undercoat in long streaks. The life support indicator on the outer panel read active. I docked and went in with my survey kit. Oren stayed on the open door and ran the communications. Nessa ran the medical protocols from just inside the airlock, close enough to hear, positioned to come forward when I called. I moved through the bow section the same way I always do. I documented everything. I moved through the empty crew quarters and the stripped galley and the cleared medical bay, all of which matched the pattern exactly. I moved to the rear cargo section. I stood in front of the pressure door and read the temperature panel. Life support temperature. I put my hand on the release. The door opened. The air came out the same way, warm and stale and close. And in the hold, in the dim standard lighting, there were people. 8 of them this time. 3 species. All of them looking at me with the same expression I had seen in my own hold 8 months earlier. The intersection of terror and something very fragile underneath it. I set my survey kit down on the floor. I sat down with my back against the doorframe. I was lower than all of them and clearly not blocking the exit. I said, "My name is Marcus Hale. I just found this ship. I'm going to need someone to tell me what is going on because I'm getting the impression this is more than just a ship." The nearest person, a young female with bright eyes and a wary expression, stared at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the others. And she looked back. "You are human," she said. "Yes," I said. "Humans do not usually come to places like this," she said. I reached into my kit and set 2 water containers in the middle of the floor. Then I moved back to the doorframe. "We are getting a reputation for it," I said. Outside, through the hull, I could hear Oren's voice on the communications array, calm and steady and precise, already running the contact sequence, already giving coordinates to Carol's office, already saying the words that would bring the team in. The young female reached out and took one of the water containers. She passed it to the person beside her first. Then she looked at me. "What happens now?" she said. "Someone is coming," I said. Good people with proper equipment, and they will do this correctly. It will take a while to get here. So for now, we stay here and you talk, and I record everything you say. Everything goes into the official record the moment you say it. Nothing can be made to disappear after that. She was quiet. The water container moved from hand to hand around the group. The people who put us here, she said, they have connections. They told us no one would come. They said this is how the galaxy works, that the ones with agreements always win. I looked at her steadily. The ones with those agreements used to win, I said. They do not anymore. There was a tribunal. It changed things. I paused. It is a long story. I will tell it to you while we wait. She looked at me for another long moment. Then something in her expression shifted. The same small shift I'd seen in Nessa's face 8 months earlier in a different hold on a different ship. Not quite belief. Not quite relief. Something earlier than both of those things. Something that was simply the first moment of considering that the outcome might be different from what she had been told to expect. Tell me, she said. I settled back against the doorframe and began. I have been in salvage for 18 years. I have bought things that nobody wanted because nobody wanted them, and I have found value in them that other people had decided was not worth the trouble of looking for. That is the work. That is what wreck brokers do. I have learned over 18 years that the most important part of the job is not what you find. It is the decision to look. It is the choice to go through the door even when you do not know what is on the other side of it. Not because you are brave, but because something is on the other side of it, and walking away is also a choice, and you would rather be the kind of person who goes through than the kind of person who doesn't. I raised my paddle at that auction because the price was good and because no one else would. I opened the hold door because someone on the other side needed the door opened. I made the call because making the call was the next obvious thing to do. I did not think any of those decisions were remarkable. I think what was remarkable was that 14 other people at that auction had the same opportunity and made a different decision. I did not say that a Judge Gore, who told me to be careful and who was afraid for reasons that were real and earned. I say it because it is simply true, and the truth of it matters. The galaxy had looked at those ships for 11 years and found reasons not to see them. One human looked at one ship and thought it was a good price. That is, as far as I can tell, the whole story. The auctioneer who ran that first sale sent me a message last week. He said that in 30 years of running galactic lots, he had never seen a human bid on that category of vessel, and he had run 4 of them. He wanted to know what made me do it. I told him the truth. No one else did. That turned out to be enough. Apparently, it always is for us. It always has been.